Well, Greg, first of all, thanks for doing this, and congratulations to you on your recent engagement.
Oh, thanks.
Uh, Twitter's great for finding out stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
I guess just the first question is, is this actually going to happen? A spring season? Um, what do you get the sense of the from the administration or the athletic department about what they think is possible?
Yeah, Mike. I think it's a good possibility. Tomorrow, the NCAA Division One Council should approve everything in terms of the championships with the NCAA moving not just the football championship, but the other fall sports championships to the spring. And then once that happens, I do believe it will clear up some things for the CAA and the schools involved at the FCS level to start planning. I'm sure you noticed this past week and the week before, the SWAC and the MEAC did release its spring schedules. They don't do the playoff like the CAA does, so it's a little bit different. But I think that kind of formula where you start in late February, I think you have to start by March 1st, kind of first and foremost to get everything in, because I think you want to be done with the playoff by May, by the end of May, probably earlier than that if you're going to ask them to turn around and play again in the fall. But I think it's certainly possible. I think a big part of it too, just in my opinion, you're going to have to let them practice in the fall. If you don't let them practice in the fall, it's going to be pretty awkward in the spring when they haven't played in such a long time. James Madison's last practice was before the national championship game, so that's a long time to go without actually practicing. I think the workouts are good, the strength and conditioning is good, but at some point you got to get the 11 guys on offense, 11 guys on defense, line them up and play. So that's just my opinion. I think you'll probably see maybe not like the full 15 practices that you do typically during the spring when you have spring ball that kind of culminates with a spring football game. But I think you'll see maybe, I would believe maybe a 10 to 12 practice type of deal, maybe late September, early October-ish, and kind of go from there. I think that would be a huge success. And I think that's something coaches are pushing for behind the scenes, at least head coaches, assistant coaches I've talked to at not only JMU, but schools across the country at the FBS and FCS levels. Who else has got a question? You can use the participant tab and raise your hand if you've got a question. Let's go to Nick Mance. He's got the next one.
Hey, Greg.
Hey.
Question. I mean, I know that JMU's brought in, pretty good recruiting classes. They have over the past couple of years, exceptionally good one. What do you think? I mean, I think this is a sort of an unanswered question for a lot of programs in FCS and FBS, but what do you think the chances are, assuming that we have like the standard, whatever it is, like early and late, sign the letter, letter of intent days, that JMU is going to be able to keep that class intact, especially lots of the the guys that are ranked as 3-star prospects.
Yeah, Nick, that's a really good question, and I know JMU has kind of put some things on hold recruiting wise because they're not exactly sure. And I'll probably write a story about this in the coming days, that you have to prepare for the possibility of having a roster for this coming spring, and then also a roster big enough to sustain and play in the fall too, next fall that is. So you have the possibility of planning for 2 seasons, or for some reason, if the spring championships don't get moved tomorrow officially, then maybe just 1 season. So there's a lot in the air in terms of what the class could look like with numbers and size. But as far as keeping the prospects they have committed, that is certainly going to be a task because, as you know, if you follow the recruiting closely, you have players in this class like Skylar Martin from Stonebridge in Ashburn, who had 7 FBS offers, and James Madison was his only FCS offer. He picked JMU over 7 FBS programs, including, I think his finalists were Vanderbilt out of the SEC and Connecticut, now an FBS independent. Those are the type of kids that James Madison has been able to get recently in this run of success that they've had, since 2014, 2015. Those are the type of kids they've been able to get and squeak through and get by and compete with like the UVAs of the world. And now you got those schools playing, and I'm sure those schools are going to use that in recruiting. That, you know, JMU, they tried this as an FCS independent, couldn't pull it off. They'll try to use a negative tactic, I think, in recruiting against JMU to try to figure this out and keep the Dukes down a little bit. So that's a really interesting part of it that I know the coaching staff at JMU is working hard to keep their commits. The one thing I will say is they've done a phenomenal job, the staff, and kind of the relationships they've made, not only in the state of Virginia, but they have strong ties in the DC, Baltimore area to both the public high schools and the private high schools. So they've done a really good job with creating relationships and trust with coaches. They picked up Kai Holmes from Gonzaga High School in DC. He's one of those WCAC kids that kind of follows the mold of that good counsel trio they picked up in the 2020 class with Jalen Green, or 2019 class, excuse me, with Jalen Green, Julio Ayamo, and Latrell Palmer. So they've done a really nice job recruiting, and the relationships are there. But this is just one other thing they're going to have to fight against when they try to get those kids that have FBS and in some cases Power 5 offers for sure. Let's go to Todd Davis. That was a good question, Nick. Let's go to Todd Davis for the next question.
Hey, Greg, thanks for doing this. And I'm just wondering, you and Jim both, I mean, how are the staff and coaches doing? You know, furloughs and
Oh, hold on, Todd.
I'm assuming you guys see I'm assuming you guys see those people around town and run into, talk to them still. How's everybody doing? Like, I got a pretty awful message. I used to work at UNCG, and they're laying off their entire athletic department for the fall semester.
Todd, can you repeat the first part of your question? I lost you there for a minute.
Yes, sorry. I'm just wondering how everybody's doing, like staff, coaches, support staff. Like I was just, I used to work at UNCG and donate down there too, and they're laying off, they're furloughing their entire athletic department for the whole fall semester because SoCon has canceled fall sports. And I'm just wondering, like, how people are doing and what the outlook is, just on a personal front. I mean, I know you and Jim have had to deal with this as well, so
Yeah, it's a tough deal. I mean, all these people in college athletics, they're kind of trained to go, all the time. If that's the thing I think a lot of people don't realize about college athletics. If there are people that work on the football side from an athletic department standpoint, they're probably working softball and in the spring and doing some women's basketball or men's basketball in the winter as well. So this has really been ongoing for a long time. The one good thing about James Madison is financially, they were in a very good spot before this. Financially, they were in a really good spot before this, and they've been able to sustain a little bit and not have some of the budgetary problems that you've seen creep up around the country. I mean, you talk about their Power 5 programs that have had to lay people off and furlough folks. I know West Virginia for sure has had to. I know Iowa State has had to. I know people at some of those programs have gone through it, and it's brutal. For sure, but James Madison's actually been able to do a pretty good job at this point. Who knows how it'll affect with no fall football. I think that's something that everybody's kind of waiting and seeing and how it will impact them, and if it'll impact into the spring as well, because there's no revenue coming in during a football season. But as of right now, because they were in a good place maybe before all this craziness started, that they've been able to sustain pretty good. But from a personal standpoint, when you get down to the player, the coach, that level, that's brutal. I mean, nobody wants to miss their season. Nobody wants to be sitting on the sideline. I'm sure it was devastating for the players that, on the eve of training camp opening, they decided to pause. And then the next day they opted to suspend the season. That had to be brutal. And I know Kurt Signetti, from talking to him yesterday, he said, that's really tough. He's tried to kind of move forward and start planning for the spring just to kind of keep positive and keep some good thoughts for his program, but certainly brutal, the personal aspect of it. Not easy for any athlete to deal with it. And that's across all sports too, because the soccer kids work just as hard as the football kids, and same thing with the baseball and all the spring sports that had to miss their season as well. So that's a good question, Todd. I think a lot of people forget that personal aspect of it, that personal touch of it. Let's see. If you joined before I let everybody know, just use the hand raising function to ask a question if you have one. And I'll promise I'll get to you. Not many people, not a huge chat. I wanted to keep it small on purpose. So if I see your hand, I'll definitely get to you. Let's go to Mike E, who has a question. Go ahead, Mike. Just unmute yourself and ask away.
Sure, you got it. So a lot of chatter about spring season. I don't know if this was asked earlier or not, but what does that look like? When would a first potential game be, and how does that impact next year's football season?
Yeah, that's a good question. Very similar to what I believe Mike H asked a little bit earlier, but I'll go through it because we didn't talk about real specifics in terms of the timeline. I mentioned kind of one of the big things I think is key is having a fall season, having a fall spring like practice, spring practice in the fall, if I said that correctly, maybe 10 to 12 fall practices just to get kind of reacclimated and get everybody resituated with having a practice. JMU hadn't had a practice since before the national championship game. And that was in January. So that's quite a long time to go for football players who are used to practicing the spring, having the strength and conditioning in the summer, and then practicing all August to not go with having a practice. As far as a timeline for a spring season, I think the key is you start with a training camp in January because you're going to have some kind of formal training camp. And then from there, you probably want to kick off the season in late February, early March. I think the tough thing is, if you're going to try to align this nationally, is figuring out how some of the conferences in the Midwest are going to deal with it. I think about the Missouri Valley. What's it going to be like at South Dakota State in late February, early March if you're trying to start a season? Not exactly the most comfortable. I wouldn't think. Is there a way? I saw the Big Ten, a couple reports today that the Big Ten was thinking about putting some of those early winter games or spring games, however they decide to do it, in dome stadiums in the Midwest. The money's probably not there to do that in the FCS unless everybody stays at the Fargo Dome for a couple weeks. But I don't know if that's going to happen. I think in Virginia, at JMU, and really across the CAA, except for maybe the Maines and the New Hampshires of the world, you could probably start late February, early March. It'd be like, weather in November, December. Wouldn't be great, but you could get through a couple weeks of it until you get into April, and then hopefully finish the regular season by the end of April, so you can have a tournament in May. And I think it's been talked about, and it's something I've kind of felt for a while, that the FCS playoff, the number of teams need to be reduced anyway. I don't know about you guys, how you guys feel sitting there watching some of those games before JMU gets to like the quarterfinals or the semifinals, but every year there's a handful of teams that you just know are not going to win the thing when you have 24 teams. So I think you could reduce the tournament field to 16, maybe 12 if you had to, if you really wanted to limit the time, and have a shortened playoff field so you could get it done by Memorial Day. I think that's the latest, because the effect it would have on the next football season is already going to be felt. Players need recovery time. So I think you'd also have to push back the following training camp at least 2 to 4 weeks, and then push back the next season, maybe even reduce the 2021 fall schedule. It's slated to be 11 games as of right now. Maybe you tune it down to 10 or 9 in order to get players full recovery. So I think that's certainly a big part of it, and something athletic directors are thinking about all over the country. Let's go to Vincent for the next question.
How you doing, Greg?
Hey.
Congratulations to you, and thank you for all the work you do in covering the football team.
Oh, appreciate it. Thank you.
My question focuses on, I know we lost a few players, a couple of fifth-year seniors that moved on to some FBS teams this season. Are we at risk of losing anybody else from this present team? And what do you see? Assuming there is a spring season, what do you see our team, the JMU, looking like this year?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's an interesting question too, because I think D'Angelo Amos and Adib Atarawa were in a really specific situation, being that they were graduate transfers. They could transfer somewhere and be immediately eligible. And that's not the case with most of the other seniors on the roster. Mike Green is not graduated yet, so he's still a true senior. You have some others, I think, in Wesley McCormick, Taurus Carroll, Percy Ajayi-Obase. Those guys are all true seniors, not graduate students yet, so they would have to sit out anywhere they went. So that to me really is the important part in that. Amos and Atarawa, with them being a little bit older and wanting to get on the field this year so they don't ruin their NFL chances. When you become – Amos is 23. If he were to have to sit out this year, not play this fall, and then wait until either the spring or even next fall, if the spring didn't happen, he would be 25 by the time the 2022 NFL draft rolls around. And he's like, there's no shot I'd get drafted then. So it's kind of hard to blame Amos for that, who's trying to better his NFL chances with moving on to both the Tarwa and Amos moved on to UVA. But for me, I don't think you'll have more, because at this point, training camps are the schools that are playing, training camps are well underway. And the season for some schools not that far away from kicking off and playing their fall seasons, whether it be in the ACC, the SEC. And that's the move. If players are going to leave JMU, they want to go to that top level. They're not going to just leave to go to a group of 5 school or another FCS school. They're going to want to go to a top tier program to either keep their stock the same or better their draft stock. And that's what Amos and Atarawa did. So as far as that goes, I think that's that in terms of the transfers. As far as the team goes and how they're going to look come spring, I would think pretty good. It starts with the quarterback spot, and that'll be the first question, and it would have been the first question had they been practicing right now. But I think Gage Maloney and Cole Johnson are perfectly capable. They're 2 guys who have been in the program and really waited their turn. Sometimes that doesn't necessarily mean you're good enough to play the starting quarterback job, but with Maloney, he brings a different dynamic. Being a left-handed quarterback, defenses do have to adjust and account for that. And I think that's something that gets a little overlooked. And in the cameo he made in the national championship game, he was tough and physical, hard to bring down. So I think he's certainly capable of running the offense. And same thing with Cole Johnson. He's smart. He knows the offense probably better than anybody since he's been in it. It's not that drastic even from what Donnie Kirkpatrick and that staff did under Mike Houston to what Shane Montgomery and Kurt Cignetti are doing now. There's a little bit more emphasis on ball security with the quarterback, and I think that helps Cole just like it helped Ben this past season, Ben DiNucci. But with Cole, I think you look at him, he throws a really good deep ball. I think people don't see that a lot because he's not out there a lot. But from in practice and from what I've seen the past couple of years, he can throw the deep ball. He's probably a little bit better runner than people think too. So I think that helps him as well. But I think the team will be good. And as long as they have those 4 running backs and all those offensive linemen coming back, they're going to be really, really tough on offense. Defense, they've got questions at corner. I don't know if Wesley McCormick and Taurus Carroll can be the lockdown corners that Rashad Robinson and Jimmy Moreland were the past couple of years. So I think they have questions there. They got to replace Amos and Atarawa, which won't be easy. I think they're better set up to replace Amos at safety. Amos was good at safety, but they have some younger players in the program that they're really high on. Chris Chuck-Winicki, Q Reed, redshirt sophomores, redshirt juniors, those types who have just had to wait behind Amos and Wayne Davis and Adam Smith and those guys. So I think they'll be okay at safety. I don't know how you replace Amos at punt returner, though. Got no answer there. He's too good for that. But that's a good question, a little overview of maybe what to expect for the 2021 spring season should it happen. Let's go to Mike Hurd for the next question. Mike?
Well, you kind of stole my thunder. I was going to ask you about the quarterback position. I guess the other question mark up for me on the roster with the graduations and the transfer is the defensive line.
Mhm.
But going back to the quarterback, are they, you think they're going to have to modify the offense at all from the way they ran it with DiNucci?
Yeah, I think you'll have to if Cole Johnson's the quarterback, and you may have to flip some of the plays, I guess, if Maloney's the quarterback, just because he's left-handed. It does. People don't think maybe it did such a big deal, but it does matter in terms of how you're running the offense, which way you're going to attack, whether it's to the right or left side, and whether or not the quarterback can throw each way the right direction with the proper mechanics and everything. So I think they will have to switch it up a little bit. Maybe they become more I don't know how easy it is to become more downhill if you're JMU. They're already pretty downhill, but I think with Maloney, they'd be even more so because of his ability to run the ball and run that read option, run the zone read, and make some plays happen in the running game with the physical style. I mean, if you pair him and you use two running backs in the backfield at the same time, plus maybe a pair of tight ends, I think that's pretty physical and pretty tough to stop, especially considering you got Fornado coming back on the offensive line, as well as Travell Wilson, who played really well for them at guard last year. I'm missing somebody too. Raymond Gillespie is back also. He did decide to come back for his 5th year. Now, I don't know how this moving to the spring yet affects that and affects players if they just decide they want to graduate and move on with life. I know we've talked a little bit about the NFL here tonight, but there is that reality too that players could just be ready to move on with what's next. So that's something to think about. And then you asked about the defensive line, because now not only do you got to replace Daka and Carter, you got to replace Adib. So that leaves Mike Green as the man in charge. He'll be fine. He'll figure it out how to make it work for him. I think Jalen Green is primed for a huge career at JMU. You guys saw him play a little bit last year when he could get on the field if Daka or Carter needed a breather. I think Garrett Gruhl is somebody who actually started a playoff game last year because Tarawa got ejected, I think, in the regular season finale against Rhode Island. Tarawa played last year, or excuse me, Gruhl played last year in a playoff game against Monmouth and I think blocked the kick too. So he could be an option at defensive tackle. Then you have to hope some of those transfers start panning out. Kurt Signetti brought in Antonio Colclough from Temple last year. He came in, didn't play much. He's young still. He's only a redshirt sophomore. And then they brought in this past winter, literally a day after the national championship game, they brought in the Minnesota transfer, Abi Enekonaji. I hope I said that right. And he can play inside or outside. Maybe they need him to play inside, though, because of the void there left by Tarawa. But you need some of those transfers, I think, on that D-line to start panning out. Like JMU's benefited from before with Carter, Rondell Carter, Darius Carter, if you think back to a couple of years ago. Need some of those guys to start working out. And then I think one other name to watch is Tony Thurston. A young guy. I think he played a little bit last year. I think he'll be in the mix as well at defensive tackle. But they do have question marks there, big-time question marks, especially after losing Adib, because you'd feel better going back with your 2-star defensive tackles as opposed to not having it. Let's see. Let's go to Nick Mantz, who has a question. Nick, you're muted still.
Yeah. So speaking about, NFL and such, I'm sure that, with no JMU football this fall, unfortunately, we'll kind of focus our attention there. So, just Greg, not holding you to it. I know that, you may or may not consider yourself, good at predicting the future, but among what I think 5 Dukes that are, in training camp with NFL teams right now, DiNucci, Rondell Carter, Brandon Polk, Dylan Stapleton, and the one guy I'm forgetting, John Daka.
John Daka with Baltimore, yep.
Who do you think is going to have the best NFL career? Or do you?
Of the 5 rookies, let's say, well, I think if you're going short term, I would say DiNucci's probably got the best shot to make the roster just because he was a draft pick. They're going to give him more opportunities to stick around. But I think Rondell still, I would think him because they're paying him even more than they're paying Danucci. So it shows you a little bit about how much they wanted him in free agency. I know Dallas has lost some guys already to injury on the defensive line. From what I've been following, I follow along with the NFL stuff just like you guys do. No hardcore inside information there. But I would think his ability to play inside, outside, they're going to start him as a 4-3 traditional defensive end. But if he puts on weight, he could go inside too, Rondell. So I think he's probably got the best shot of the rookies. And then if you look, they've got 13 guys in James Madison has 13 guys in training camps right now. And Marcus Marshall is most recent. He signed with Tennessee, I think yesterday, to give him 13. Brandon Polk actually was cut already by the LA Rams. So it was a quick stay there for Polk. But you never know. He could bounce back and find somewhere else to play. I think they probably could have more than half of those guys actually on NFL rosters or on practice squads at the very worst. I think obviously Raven Green seems to he's going to be a huge piece in Green Bay, from what I can tell. Just listening to what the coaches have said there and reading a little bit about it, seemed like they missed him last year. Aaron Stinney seems like he's found a home in Tampa. And then I look at guys like Daniel Brown and Dean Marlowe. They've stuck around in the league. Josh Wells has stuck around in the league. That gives you 5 right there already. Plus you throw in Rashard Davis and Jimmy Moreland. That's over 7. That's 7 there. And then you think probably a couple of the rookies will make the roster of the practice squad. So I think, it's kind of an interesting time. They lead the FCS and have a lot more than even some, pro, than even some FBS and Power 5 schools. So yeah, it should be interesting. Got about 10 minutes left here on the chat. Let's go to Todd Davis. We got another question.
I didn't actually have another one.
Okay, sorry, Todd. Let's go to Vince. Let's go to Vincent. Vincent's got his hand up too.
Hey, Greg, just getting back to the quarterback situation, do you see that Maloney could possibly be used as like a wildcat option if what's his name gets the starting position at quarterback?
Yeah, if Cole wins the job, I think you probably have to find some kind of playing time for Maloney, because you probably want to keep him on the roster, right? If he doesn't win the quarterback job this year, just because of the nature of that position, it's not often like guys like Cole Johnson stick around for 5 years to wait their turn. So you'd probably want to keep him in the program. So yes, I would think you'd have to find some playing time for him as a wildcat quarterback, and it could be beneficial also just to give opponents a different look, especially if you don't want to get Cole banged up. He can run, but he's not the thickest person. So maybe you don't want him taking all those hits. Maybe you'd rather have Maloney in there doing some downhill running next to Percy and Luttrell. That would be, quite the heavy backfield of people. If you throw a tight end in there too, I think Drew Painter's probably poised for a big year at tight end and can do some of the things that Dylan Stapleton did last year. So that's to answer your question. Let's go. Who else has won? I think I see Nick Mance with his hand up. Go ahead, Nick. You're muted again.
Again, sorry about that. I guess this, and it was kind of at least like stated just in passing on Twitter, I think, by Coach Signetti, stating that, one of the factors that played a role in JMU canceling or postponing its fall season was that they didn't have anyone there to play them. And they couldn't schedule any opponents. Do you have any insight in that, or do you know specifically who they may have asked? And just quick follow up to that, do you know, are there plans to have a potential spring championship? Is that going to be in Frisco or no, based on?
Yeah, those are all good questions, and I can shed some light on the scheduling aspect first. We'll touch on that first. They tried. I know for a fact they tried. I even called some of the other schools that I knew could have had some interest and definitely had some conversations. Basically, any FBS program you can think of within a 5-hour radius of James Madison was asked. I know they were told, if we get an opening, we'll play you. But I think the turning point was when the ACC decided that they would go conference only +1. It took away a few opportunities. There were some other in-state programs that just flat out didn't really want to play. If you guys can kind of match that up. There were other FCS programs I know in the mix too, not to name names, but again, within driving distance. But because it wasn't clear whether or not their leagues would play and they were going to do whatever their leagues would do, they never decided they would actually agree to a game because of all the uncertainty. And at the FCS level, that's probably expected since James Madison's one of the few that actually could afford the coronavirus testing and do it properly as many as the NCAA outlined. Let's see. And your question about Frisco, that's something I'm going to have to find out. As soon as I know, I'll make sure I report it and let you guys know. But I would assume so. I know they got the pro soccer team there, but there are ways to work around that for sure. Got a few minutes for a couple more questions. Let's go to Mike E. Go ahead, Mike. All right, maybe not Mike. Let's see. Hold on, Mike. You're muted.
I think my hand was up from earlier.
Okay, no problem.
But I'm sure I can find a question for you. What are, as kind of the beat reporter, what do you like about JMU football, and what are the differences in like the access, and just tell us about your experience going from West Virginia to, covering JMU.
Yeah, it's really interesting because Morgantown and WVU really it's the show in the state. That's it. I mean, you get the whole state basically covers West Virginia University athletics, whether it's football or men's basketball. So you really get used to kind of competing with a lot more with a lot more media members. And then you go to James Madison, and the beat is much smaller. I'd say at West Virginia, there's probably 30 to 35 people there every time there's something going on, a game or a practice. Football, less with basketball, but a lot with football. And then at JMU, there's probably 2 or 3 of us regularly, and then maybe 5 or 6 others that come on game day. So it's very different. I think covering West Virginia and having that experience at the Power 5 level made me a better writer. I had to kind of figure out some things in terms of how to differentiate my content there, because I wanted to beat the other people in the market. Here, I still use some of those tactics, and I think it's definitely been used to my advantage that I can still report that way. JMU fans, I will say, are very knowledgeable. Maybe even a little more knowledgeable than the West Virginia fans. But JMU fans read everything. They're really good, and they care about their fan base from what I've learned over the last 4 or 5 years being in Harrisonburg. And that's really neat to me. It's great to have a rabid fan base that cares, reads the stories, watches the games, knows the backup left guard and the backup safety just like you do. It's really nice, and they have a really good fan base. So it's been great. I think that's all the questions I see. Last chance for anybody. You got 2:21 to ask it if you got anything else, or we can wrap up here.
Oh, I'll ask then.
Okay.
Going back to the graduate students that transfer to UVA, I mean, what happens to them if either UVA or the ACC cancels?
Yeah, those players are going to have decisions to make then. They won't be able to come back to JMU without penalty. So they'll have to play out that season at UVA or simply enter the NFL draft, whenever that next season at UVA would be, or going to the NFL draft. So that's really their choices now that they're enrolled and playing for Virginia. They're already practicing with UVA, both of those guys. So I'd expect them to be out there for the Cavaliers. But that'll do it, I think, for this first try. Thanks to everybody for showing up. You guys asked great questions, too, so I really do appreciate it. It's been fun doing it, and I'll definitely do more because I think tonight was pretty good. I enjoyed doing it. It was a success. You guys asked great questions. So I appreciate you guys hopping on and joining the Zoom chat.
Yeah, thanks very much. And it's good to have a beat writer covering the Dukes. All
Thanks.
Great.
Greg.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Thanks
All right.
everyone.
right, bye.